I want to show you how to mix your tracks so that they sound good no matter what speakers your listeners listen on. The issue is that most producers mix for these here, or maybe even studio headphones, whereas most listeners are listening on these, or maybe even their phone speakers. You can use these strategies no matter what production software or DAW that you use. I'm using FL Studio, but you can use any software to get this exact same effect. So I have this unmixed beat here. It has lots of cool kind of melody layers and a solid beat that comes in. Before you even start mixing this beat, there's lots of things you need to do that will make your life and your mix 10 times easier. The first is having high quality samples. There's so many places to get high quality samples. We use Wavegrind to get all of our samples, but wherever you get them from, make sure that they don't have harsh frequencies. Make sure they don't have gaps at the start of the sample. Make sure that the 808s are tuned to C. And something else that's very important to look into that I only properly learned about recently is making sure that your samples are in phase. So I have the kick and the 808 here on their own. I'm going to pan one of them all the way to the left and the other one all the way to the right. And I'm going to open up this free plugin called MSED. I'm going to have a look at this reading here, which is the corrilometer, if I pronounced it correctly. And as you can see, we're getting about 0 in the middle, which is pretty good. If you were to see this down in the negative, what you want to do is go and double click on your sample, click reverse polarity, and then go up here. And if it's showing up in the positive, then it's good to go. I grabbed this other sample here just for an example. And if you're getting a negative correlation like this, that's when you can go in and click this button here, and it's going to be a positive correlation. This stops your kick and 808 from cancelling each other out, and you can do the exact same thing for melodies. And before you even start mixing, you just made the process 10 times easier. Another very important thing you can do is make sure that your melodies are in different octave ranges. So as you can see, we have this melody here, and this is from C6 to around C7, whereas this other melody is from around C5 to C6. This isn't necessarily a rule, and sometimes stacking sounds on top of each other can sound good, but if you feel like your melodies sound muddy, they're difficult to mix, and they really fight for a space in the mix, try keeping them in different octave ranges. And with that out of the way, go and select all of the layers that you want to mix. Go into your mixer track, go into the first insert and click Ctrl-Shift-L, which is going to send all of them to the mixer track. I'm going to start by going onto the master channel and sliding the stereo separation knob to the top. That means your left and right ear are hearing the exact same thing. And mixing in mono can be really helpful because it makes it easier to hear what's going on. Now, the best way to start mixing is going through these layers one by one and setting the volume. I like to start with the melodies, and this is where a lot of producers make a big mistake of having their melodies up around here in the volume range. And what happens is, if you want the kick and the 808 and the snare to really slap, you have to turn them up really high. And then you get into a fight where all these sliders are really high up the top, and it's almost impossible to mix this beat without it sounding incredibly distorted. To combat this, I like to have the first slider at around 40 to 70% of the maximum volume. Then there's more room to make some of the layers stand out. And then at the end, if the final mix is a bit quiet, you can use a compressor, a maximizer, a clipper, or whatever you want to boost the final volume, which I'm going to show you in a second. And on top of just setting the levels, you can add an EQ to these melodies. One thing I really like doing, and I've seen lots of top producers do this in live streams, is going and adding an EQ and cutting out some of the lower frequencies. As you can see up in this little helper here, we have the sub and the bass at around these frequencies here. And what we did is we pretty much cut them out. If you listen to the beforehand, and now this is the after, it sounds incredibly different, but you cut out all of these frequencies that you can't really hear that would be clashing with the bass and the low end of your mix. And I like to do this for all the melodies. And one other thing you can do is you can go and grab this slider here, which changes the frequencies, right click on it, click create automation clip, go and place a point where your beat comes in, place a lower point, and then lower this point all the way down. And what that's going to do is, at the start of your track when just the melodies are coming in, this EQ is going to be normal, whereas when the beat comes in, this snaps up to here, which means that your melody can still sound warm and full and have those bass elements, but when the actual 808 and kick comes in, it's going to cut them out. Now I'm going to bring in some of the other layers. As you can see, because we mix the melodies quieter, there's so much room to move when boosting the volume of this kick. If If you want your 808 to sound more full without making it louder, you can add texture to it by adding a distortion like this. So this is with the distortion off. And notice the volume it's hitting at. And then when I turn the distortion on, it has that signature kind of distorted, massive 808 feel without being at some massive volume. That's going to make it so much better for people who are listening on AirPods, for example, which don't have an amazing amount of bass, because they'll still get that bass feel without it completely destroying their AirPods. If you manipulate the threshold knob here, it's going to change how much of that you have. And if you do actually want to boost the volume of your 808, you just turn up the pre. I want to add a bit of reverb to this. If you turn up the decay time, it's going to add a bit of a tail to it and make it sound a lot wider. I'm going to add some reverb to this hi-hat. I have the size about halfway, and I just go and have the wet at about 40%, and it just makes it sound a bit wider and a little bit less robotic. As you can see, the final mix is around -6 decibels, which gives you some range to go and boost the volume. I'm going to turn stereo separation off, and this is what the final mixed beat sounds like. There are lots of ways to go and boost the volume of your track. The most simple one is going and grabbing something like Fruity Soft Clipper and going and increasing the post. You can also use something slightly fancier like the knock clipper. And these boost the volume of your beat without making them sound distorted. The final way I tend to master my beats is using Isotope Ozone Maximizer. If you have a kind of smoother R&B style beat, I recommend increasing the character, whereas if you have it down at fast, the way that it deals with the peaks and the clipping is quite a bit more fast, so it sounds punchier. I'm going to go and decrease the threshold. Until I start to see some of these peaks here, and then move it back up slightly. So that was the theory behind how to mix your track, but how can you test it to know if it's actually going to sound good on all listening devices and if it's ready to send out to an artist or get a vocalist to put vocals on it? One way to do that is by using an acapella. I have this one here, which is from a Drake and Future song. I don't imagine these guys are best of friends at the moment, but if you want to keep your BPM the same as your track, go and make the BPM of your track the same as the acapella, which is 140 BPM. I'm going to right click on time, click project tempo, and change the mode to auto, and then you can go and change the BPM of your track back to whatever it was before you dragged in this sample, which for me it's basically the same. It was 138, and then you're going to click restretch. And what just happened is we just synced the BPM for this acapella to the beat, which means we can listen to both of them at the same time. And then if you roughly line it up with your beat, you can hear what your beat would sound like with vocals. So just here, for example. These bitches be nagging the kid, they get on my motherfucking nerves. I showed her a Rex and they love me. I'm smoking that packing on money. Taliban on these hoes. Give a Zan to these hoes. I think it sounds pretty good. This part here sounds really crowded, but this is supposed to be in the hook. So if we find the hook in this acapella, for example. Yeah. I did the digital dash. I put a bitch on the balance. I got a junkie a blast. I said it don't to your mom. We can hear that these sound pretty good when they're mixed together. If you were to drag in an acapella and play it and it sounds way too overcrowded, consider going and removing some of your melody elements, maybe even a drum element, making your 808 and kick a bit less quiet. Because if there's a male vocalist or rapper which tends to have a bit of a deeper voice, that's going to really clash with some of the low end of the melodies and with the bass. I haven't actually tried this yet, but there's this one plugin that was made by Rocket Power Sounds called the Car Test. And if you turn it on, it's supposed to simulate what happens when you're listening to a track in a car. So if you have a listen to this, for example. But if we were to go and massively distort this track, let's just say when we were mixing in Ozone, we got crazy and put the threshold all the way down. You can hear how distorted and crazy something sounds, so it can be helpful to go and do that. Or if you have a car just like this, you can go and test it in your car. hope you learned a lot from this mixing tutorial. If you want to learn how top producers make their beats, go and click one of the recommended videos. If you want thousands of royalty-free samples and MIDI, just like the ones that we use when creating this beat, click the link in the description to go to wavegrind.com. But a lot of the free packs in the description are secret free packs, which means you can only find the link on this video. I hope you enjoyed the free royalty-free samples, and I hope that all your beats have an amazing mix as you follow this strategy.